Before we jump into the episode, do you ever get so wrapped up in your business you forget it's time to get someone special a gift? Not the same boring flowers or cookie cutter bauble. No, you want something unique, one of a kind. Guys, I got you. Click the link in the description or scan the QR code if you're watching on TV and go to the Glass Arts Collective. They have dozens of handmade, one-of-a-kind items in lots of categories. You'll find animals, jewelry, holiday gifts, and lots more. All a one-of-one and ready to ship anywhere in the US. Head over there to find that special gift for your special someone, and thank you, Glass Arts Collective, for sponsoring GYET. This is Get Your Entrepreneurship Together, where you'll find stories, tips, and value from successful entrepreneurs who are out there crushing it. Here's a short preview of this week's episode.
We don't get paid, we don't get measured on intent or effort. We get paid on results.
You get into that static, again, those ones and zeros types of thinking, and it may serve you in the moment, but not for long term. And it goes right back to reading a textbook versus living it.
I think as professionals and as leaders, the one thing that we almost always have to stay true to.
And welcome back to the show, everyone. My name is Brian Elam. I will be your host here on Get Your Entrepreneurship Together. And today we're going to talk about high performance. High performance when it comes to entrepreneurship. And we're even going to get into a little bit of intrapreneurship. So if you're that person that wants to rise in the C-suite, excel, and take ownership of what you do within a company, this can work for you too. And we have Aaron Trahan here today to guide us through what that looks like, what it takes to actually step in to high and peak performance. And I cannot wait for this conversation. It is going to be packed full of value, experiences. So Aaron, thank you so much for coming on, man. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Brian. Yeah, me too. Also looking forward to a value-packed conversation. So thank you for having me.
Oh, again, my pleasure, my pleasure. So I like to always kind of set the foundation for the audience. That way they have a better understanding of who you are, where you came from. That way we, again, have that foundation, and then we'll build the experience and the story from there. So tell us where you grew up and what was your childhood like?
Yeah, I grew up in a small Southeast Texas rural town. Not a whole lot happening there. Very predominant, kind of one-dimensional local industry centered around oil and gas. It was just one of those tight-knit community type of environments. Just about everybody knew everybody. And, it was one of those places where not much was given and a lot had to have been earned. So I think that was kind of the theme kind of growing up, was really instilled with a strong kind of moral, ethical compass and the overarching kind of belief that, there's never going to be a substitute for hard work. You're able to go out and get anything you want as long as you are willing to put in the effort and the work to go get it. But we're not in a place of the country where, you should expect any handouts. No one's coming to knock on your door and deliver it to you on a silver platter. And so, yeah, it was kind of one of those mentalities that if you want it, nothing's stopping you but yourself, but you have to go get it. And I think that's been kind of a theme that's been instilled with me that has come up throughout my, personal life, but also my professional career.
Makes perfect sense. Midwest upbringing. I feel you on that one. We were talking just off camera here about, how I grew up in Kansas, and I grew up in a very small town, pretty similar to what you're describing right there. And yep, I 100% agree. Nothing was handed to you. You went out, you worked for it, you earned it. And there's a lot of there's a lot of pride and a lot of satisfaction that comes from that, showing yourself that you're capable of those types of things. And so what did your parents do?
Yeah, so my mom was kind of an X-ray technician, worked in a local doctor's office. My dad was, really one of those rags to riches stories. Started out working in a warehouse for a kind of regional retail company, and ended up moving into sales, working his way up to eventually becoming the president of the company. And that gave me a glimpse into what that kind of looks like. And so it was actually the same company that I was able to intern with right out of college. And then where I was able to kind of start my career, getting to, really be able to experience, yeah, sitting in a business school class, understanding what the world looked like via a textbook and case study and perfect world scenario, but then spending the other part of my day of actually seeing what reality looked like and how much more messy and not as linear and articulate as a textbook likes to make the business world. And so it was an incredible opportunity that I took advantage of to really be able to connect the dots between what the business books say versus how businesses actually get run, how they grow, how they fail, and how they're managed.
So I just want to touch on that just a little bit because, not every entrepreneur that starts a business gets into business actually has the collegiate education behind them. So what did you find was fact versus fiction when it comes to reading the textbooks and then living it in real life? What were some of those things that you found?
Yeah, a lot basically, right? So it's just about everything that I was experiencing in a classroom versus what I was experiencing in an office was very different. I think the two things that jump out to me is one, adversity, right? It's like, how do you overcome adversity? How are you going to react, respond when things don't go to plan? And it's kind of like the analogy that I like to use with my clients is like, you're just never going to be able to learn how to swim by reading a book. Sometimes you just have to get in the pool, learn, what it's all about, what it feels like. And for me, that was a lot like business. You can read all the case studies, you can understand economics, you can look at a balance sheet, but those are just outputs to the actual work that actually happens. And the second thing that was really a stark difference that I still don't see really a lot of business schools, even at an MBA level, being able to properly account for is the people aspect. And regardless of what the business is, regardless of industry, regardless of sector, whether you're Apple, this Fortune 10 company, or you're a startup in a garage, every single organization is made up of people. And we just don't come out of college knowing how to lead people and lead teams and lead organizations. And that leadership aspect is an acquired skill and it's messy. People, there's just a lot of dynamics around people. So that was another one of the things that kind of jumped out that, when you assume a leadership role, whether in a startup or within a team, within an organization, no textbook really or professor really encapsulates what leadership is all about, how to grow, develop, nurture, and guide people. And so those were really the two things that jumped out to me as one of the things that was like, there's no book that I can read to really learn this. This is going to require real world experience reps for me to get good and for me to actually improve and develop. But there's no class for this.
Right. Yep. That's kind of what I figured you would go down and
Mhm.
say. It's more of the intrapersonal dynamics of running a business or being involved in the business versus just here's the numbers, here's your P&L sheet and how to construct it and all of this. And yeah, that's great and those are important,
Mhm.
but just like you said, companies are made up of people and the better you are with them, the better your company is going to be. And so going into that, talking about real life and experience and seeing it from the ground up. Was that company that your father ended up being a CEO of, was that the one you were talking about in the materials sent over, that you climbed the C-suite and became a senior executive in that company? Is that the one?
Yeah, yeah, that's right. And maybe partially because of my relationship with my dad, I was always managed the hardest, right? So I was always the one, there couldn't be any perception of nepotism here, and so it was made very clear they're going to be harder on me than everybody else. And that started at a very early age. And so I think because of that, of being pushed to deliver outsized results, I think it ultimately set me up versus going anywhere else and kind of being treated as an equal, right? Where expectations were a bit lower. And so, yeah, I think it was, and I learned something very valuable, in that experience. And luckily, we were a company that was probably more bootstrapped than necessary. So there wasn't a whole lot of layers of management. Very tough culture from just a work ethic standpoint, back to those, Southeast Texas roots, right? And so a lot of people couldn't survive the culture. And that ultimately helped me really be able to separate myself. But the other thing was that I learned very early on was companies of any shape or size will always value those that can execute. Those people that are somehow, some way able to cut through the noise and just get things done. And so that became not really my secret weapon, but that was going to be the skill set that I hung my hat on. I was going to be able to do what was required, form the cross-functional relationships, and leverage my, internal knowledge of how the entire organization worked to flat out be able to get more things done in these standard time increments that we all have, 24 hours in a day, 7 days in a week, 12 days in a month. I prided myself on being able to do what was required to get more things done, push more things forward than everybody else. And when you have that level of being able to execute, yeah, I was able to get more opportunities to step up and grow into. And that became the story. It's really helped me accelerate my way up the corporate ladder very quickly to eventually becoming a senior executive of the company by the time I was 30 years old.
Right, right. And how did you begin to recognize that you had this particular skill set? Because I can't imagine that they taught you how to be so driven and execute, while you were sitting there in class. Like, how did you discover this?
Yeah, I think a lot of it was environment, right? It was being in that type of corporate environment where nothing else mattered. Like it was very clear that we don't get paid, we don't get measured on intent or effort. We get paid on results. Period. So if you're able to deliver results, you're going to get noticed. You're going to get, rewarded. I mean, it's a very flat organization. So I had visibility not only from my dad, but also, my dad's bosses, right? And so it really wasn't a popularity contest. It didn't matter who you knew or who you didn't know. It was very clear from an organizational standpoint what mattered the most, and it was execution, it was getting things done, and it was generating results. And so, yeah, I kind of credit the environment that I was in that helped me remove all the different layers that can typically come with what it looks like to grow within an organization. And I think in this environment, it was just very clear. And in some cases, people would say maybe even very cutthroat, which is okay as long as the context there, right? As long as we're open and honest about what winning actually looks like in an organization like that. And so I would say the environment, it's almost like the great book by James Clear, Atomic Habits. And he has a quote in that book that really sums up beautifully what I experienced early on in my career, is that your environment is the invisible hand that shapes behavior. And I think that for me was a guiding force that I was able to apply, that it Didn't matter who I knew, didn't matter what my last name was, didn't matter who my dad was. Was I going to be able to deliver results or not? That's all that mattered. Plain and simple. And so, yeah, I think it was much more of an environmental thing than just about anything else.
And you mentioned having an understanding about what winning looks like within an organization. And that is obviously super important. People have to know what they're working for, why they're working for, and what that, you know, what the ultimate goal is, what the vision is, right?
Mhm.
And so who set that vision at the company that your father was helping or running? Was that
Mhm.
instilled already when you started climbing the ladder, or did you help uncover that?
Yeah, I think a little bit of both, right? Yeah, I think, one of the things that I now say today to a lot of the clients and organizations that I work with, especially at the CEO level, is look, whether you like it or not is irrelevant. But if you are a leader of any organization, whether with inside a company or for the company as a whole, communication is your biggest KPI. It is up to you to make sure that your most important thing as a leader is ensuring that the rest of the organization knows what that most important thing is. And I think that's very tough to get right 100% of the time. There's going to be ebbs and flows. There's going to have to be changes and strategic reprioritizations as things within either the competitive landscape or the macro environment, certainly drives a different, what success looks like kind of definition for the organization. And so, yeah, it's one of those things that I think every organization is finding its way and figuring out how to become more effective and more effective. But I think that's where the art and science of leadership really comes in. And not to say that this organization got it right 100% of the time, not to say it got it wrong 100% of the time, but I think it's always that area that every leader, every business should strive to continuously improve on, because that is going to be the thing that will always have an outsized impact on shaping the prioritization, focus, and execution for the organization. So, yeah, I think it's one of those things that I probably certainly helped. But it was one of those things that I learned how to make an impact in that area from that same environment too.
Right. And that's where exactly where I wanted to go next, because the framework was already there. But you, either from the leadership above you or you're just understanding of, from working in the business all those years, you knew that there was room to, as you say, morph, change,
Mm.
modify some things, move things around. So you had that framework to work within, but you also knew you had the ability to modify it to make it better, stronger, faster, all of those things. Yeah, I really love that you made that point, because it's so easy for, humans to think in black and white, A, B, ones and zeros, and it's in as you said, in business, it's not a straight line. It's a freaking mess
That's
all
right.
the way to the top.
That's
So
right. That's right.
definitely glad you articulated that. And so in having this experience and being so young and rising the ladder so quickly there at that company, when did you get inspired to get into coaching? And what made you say, this is the next level for me?
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. Thanks for asking, because it really takes me back to that quarter life crisis I feel like I had, right? And after that tremendous run of success, that's where it got real. And while that journey from my internship to senior executive may sound like a highlight reel that was just an up and to the right trajectory, I tell people all the time what sits underneath that, the reality that I'll share with you is that I'm confident I've made every possible mistake that you could have made in the area of leadership. And, once I got to that level where I now had board level responsibility for a publicly traded company, I was by far and away in just about every room that I was in, was the youngest and most inexperienced in that room. And while I had some success, I also had to realize that now is not the time to let success breed complacency. And it's just inevitable that it happens, right? I think as professionals and as leaders, the one thing that we almost always have to stay true to is not to think that we're going to be the exception, right? This shows up in every facet of life. Sports teams say all the time about how much more difficult it was trying to repeat as champions than it was winning their first title. Every Fortune 500 company says the same thing. Maintaining and sustaining number one market share, far more difficult than reaching that share the first time. And that's what I faced as a leader. It's like tremendous amount of success early on. And as soon as you start believing, oh, I've got this thing all figured out, I know exactly what I'm doing. That's the moment you stop growing. That's the moment you stop being coachable. That's the moment you stop striving for continuous improvement. And I think I got bit by the complacency bug for a short period of time there. And my entrance into coaching actually came from being a client. I needed help really expanding my perspective, seeing around corners, understanding blind spots. And so when I went out and enlisted some outside help to really elevate my professional journey, the one area that jumped out that I probably needed the most focus and attention on was leadership. My skill around strategy and operations kind of masked the underlying weakness that I've already talked about, and that's how to manage and lead people. And to make a long story short, that's where I began to experience the major directional pivot in my career and life, I would say. And that's being much more of that servant leader to people, helping others reach their next level, being the springboard for other people and teams to make that leap from their version of good to their version of great. And that just became, the underlying gravitational pull that's led me to doing what I'm doing today.
Mm, yep. It's so often that happens that and it's very good that you
Mhm.
had the I guess lack of ego to
Mhm.
actually go out there and search for someone to say, "Hey, I'm I'm not doing very good in this area. I need some help. Can you help me?" Because so many people struggle with asking for help. I know I did when I went out there for my first entrepreneurial venture.
Yep.
I'm sure you've experienced it too, but yeah, that is so key, guys. And I'm sure Aaron agrees. He's shaking his head. He agrees. If you're thinking that you're just not excelling, make sure you're asking for help.
That's right.
And so when you were sitting there in those board meetings, I'm just envisioning, this big oval table, a bunch of a bunch of old white guys sitting around, in suits and ties and
Taking
everything.
me
And
back. You're taking me. That was it.
and you're sitting there sweating in that wool suit that's brand new. And you're
Yeah.
looking around the table, like, oh my God, I am the youngest person here. These guys think I'm probably just a freaking idiot. Um, did you lean into that and actually ask these people who had been there for years and knew, had so much more experience? Did you lean into that and just ask them? It's like, hey, what can you help me? What can you teach me? Did you do that?
Um, Not as much as I should have. In hindsight, now being surrounded by the people that I was surrounded by, I should have been 5 times more aggressive in doing that. I should have been blowing up their phones. I should have been peppering them with questions. But I think at that point in time, my curiosity was somewhat blinded by the ego that was kind of driven on by, yeah, yeah. And so it's like it was one of those. While I did learn from them, I did seek out their mentorship across, a couple of different areas. I can look back and honestly say nowhere near to the degree that I should have now knowing what I know today on just how little I knew that I knew back then, right? And so, yeah, I think if I could do it all over again, that would certainly be I could have certainly handled that situation, and not even situation, the opportunity better to leverage that to fuel my growth. Um, and yeah, I think it's one of those things that I think about often.
Yeah. Well, there you go, guys. Don't blind yourself from those opportunities, especially if you're lucky enough to be sitting around with people that are so much more experienced than you are. Get the ego out of the way.
Mm.
Again, ask for help. And so, thinking about that boardroom and you're sitting around with those guys, I'm wondering if you agree with me on this, that if you were to talk to them and say, hey, Bob, you've been doing this for so much longer than me. You've got so much more experience. What can you teach me that I don't know? What
Mhm.
can you help me develop? And if you were doing that, not only obviously would it level you up and benefit you, but you would be working on that human aspect that we were talking about earlier of building those relationships and fostering those deeper connections and making a more harmonious business environment. Would you agree with that?
I would, and I would also add to that on what I've now found of really going down this journey of how to leverage coaching, how to leverage mentoring and advising. I think there's levels to even that. And I think for anybody looking, whether you're an early stage entrepreneur or you found product market fit, you're now in scale and growth mode. I think when you're looking for that advice, make sure you're doing it through the lens of not looking for an answer, more so than looking for new perspectives and insights on how to think about finding the answer. And I think that's something else as I kind of think about early on in my career. I was quick to want to go to a subject matter expert, find the answer. How would you handle this? When in reality, I I just want to broaden my thinking, broaden my perspectives, get an understanding from them on how would you think about solving this? How should I be thinking about solving that? Because that's going to be the feedback and the insights that you can get that plants the seed moving forward on just really how to apply that type of guidance and insight to things further out in the future. And so I would caution entrepreneurs, don't go and find mentors or those who can provide you the answer, but more so think about who can help you think more broadly and differently and more dynamically on how to think about finding this answer and many more, behind it.
So good. So good, man. I am just thrilled that you went there because it's absolutely true. The more you can expand your thinking and ask the right questions or better questions, you're just that much farther ahead.
Yeah, and I mean, too much advice given today, if you're just asking them very transactional advice, you're going to run the risk of just getting someone else to read off their winning lottery ticket, right? When it's very tactical, yes, that may have been an approach or strategy that worked for them in that scenario at that moment in time within that business condition, and it may have 0% applicability to what you're ultimately needing help and guidance with. So, getting the answer is a far less effective way to receive advice than getting enhanced ways of thinking about having or how to find answers.
Mm, mm. And that goes right into something that one of my first mentors taught me was basically if you're looking at a situation or a piece of feedback and you're thinking, this doesn't have anything to do with what I do, you're thinking about it wrong. The question you should be asking is, how does this apply to what I do? What
Hmm.
part of it can apply to what I do? Because you're right. You get into that static, again, those ones and zeros types of thinking, and it may serve you in the moment, but not for long term. And it goes right back to reading a textbook versus living it.
That's right. Yeah, and it's much more about getting better over the long term versus finding a shortcut to the answer that I need right now. And I think over time, those two different approaches will yield wildly different results.
Mm, there we go. There we go. All right, guys. Well, drop the ego, ask for help, ask to understand the questions you should be asking,
Mhm.
right? Right? These are the things that you need to do in order to level yourself up. And now I want to step into some more, I guess, maybe tactical, maybe even philosophical. We'll
Sure.
just see how it goes. But you have this formula, this 3 out high performance formula. Can you go into that? What are the 3 outs and what does it all mean?
Sure, sure. Yeah, and I'll add a little background here. And, I'm a systems thinker. So I like to find ways to bring down ideas and concepts from the abstract and get it as tactical as I can, ideally in an equation or a step by step guide. And around this particular area, since I was an intern, I studied different professionals and executives, and I noticed there were always those group of leaders, let's call them the minority, that just always seemed to have an upward trajectory. They were just doing things that led to, doesn't mean it was up and to the right, but they just always figured out how to find new levels of success and achievement, where other professionals either had major peaks and valleys or reached a certain point and plateaued out, and they just never found that quote unquote next level. And this just happens across everything, right? We see it in sports, we see it in business, we see it in personal lives, whatever it may be. And so I really started to think, like, what are the common threads? Why do some people rise and continue to rise versus people that just hit that artificial ceiling way too early? And over the past 20 years or so, I just really started examining is like, what is it? What are the common threads? What could I distill down into a checklist or some bullet points that if I just did these things over and over, it would get me the results from this group and not that group? And these were the three things that consistently were found in every single one of the differentiators. And the first one was the group that always found new levels of success. They always out prepared everyone around them. They were the ones that you never question whether they did the homework or the due diligence or whether their I's were dotted, T's were crossed. Doesn't mean they were right 100% of the time, but they were very thoughtful in their approach that was backed by a data or experience backed thesis, right? And they were going to be prepared. They reflected. They always wanted to kind of understand what does worst case scenario look like, and I've got a plan in the event that that happens. So that was kind of the first thing. It's just they were the best students, right? They just were so prepared. The second thing was they outworked everyone around them, right? It's kind of back to what we were talking about earlier. It's just there is no substitute for hard work. But I also want to acknowledge this isn't some hustle culture speak either. These weren't people that walked around the room with a badge of honor on their shoulder of how many hours they worked in the week. This was all about productivity. It was all about finding operating leverage. It was all about execution. And so we all only have 24 hours in a day. They had an ability to just flat out get more done in that time period, either being masterful delegators, automators, completely, outsourcing things that needed to be done but didn't need to be done by them, and just always looked on how to increase their inputs from their outputs. They were highly, highly productive. And then lastly, and I would argue maybe even the most important, they outlearned everyone around them. Regardless of their success, regardless of their track record, whether they were the highest ranking or highest paid person in the room, they were committed to being the best students in the room. So they were not concerned about their idea being right. They were just concerned about using anyone's idea to get to the right, most effective answer. So they stayed in learning mode. They had no ego barrier of asking someone 2, 3, 4 layers below them what their thoughts were, why they thought that way, how could they learn from them. And that's one of the things that usually shows up first, that after a leader reaches a certain level of success, that's the first thing that goes. They stop being in learning mode. This group of leaders that just found new level after new level, they consistently did these three things. They out-prepared, they outworked, and they outlearned everyone around them. And through my own stress testing of this, it's undefeated. I've yet to see any example of anyone who does these three things consistently and doesn't find new levels of success.
Love it. Love it. I told you guys, packed full of value this episode. I knew it just right from the beginning. Very good, man. And so I'm wondering, is it those three things that you've seen that hold most people back from being high performers? Or is there another set of things that you've experienced in your years of doing this that, these are the common roadblocks or traps that people fall into that keep them from reaching that peak performance?
Yeah. I kind of like to think of it like this. So if we take the 3-out high performance formula, sure, that's a tactic. I think of that as like an arrow in the quiver, right? But there has to be something above that. There's got to be something that makes a leader wanting to execute that tactic. And I think what that ultimately comes down to is having a bias of action towards continuous improvement. Because you may know about this tactic, you may agree that, yeah, if you do these three things, for sure, you're going to grow and succeed and develop high performance. But if you lose that bias for action towards continuous improvement, these aren't things that people don't already know. It's not like this is not the secret code to launch a rocket to Mars, like with what Elon's doing, right? This is pretty basic blocking and tackling. What it comes down to is those couple things, that almost the umbrella. Are you going to be disciplined enough to do the things that you know are required to grow, regardless of how you feel? And then does that show up in the form of a bias for action? Are you willing to take action to keep doing them over and over and over again? Because you can have all the tactics, all the tools, everything in the world, but if you don't have the discipline to stay committed to it and you don't have the bias for action, it's just words on a page or just my voice going into the universe. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter. And so I would say more than just the tactic or the tool or the framework, I would argue that discipline to take action is going to be far more critical, that then allows you to take advantage of the tools, because thinking and believing doesn't get you anywhere. If you think and believe all the right things, you say all the right things, you post all the right things on your LinkedIn page, all that's great. I'm all for the affirmations and things like that. But the warning here is that if you don't put any action behind it, you're very likely going to be in the same place this time next year that you are right now. Action is what drives everything. And with a lack of it, doesn't matter how great the tool is. You can have the biggest hammer on the planet, but if you don't swing it and hit the nail, you're not going to see any result of it.
Right. Absolutely. And so that brings me to the next question that I had was, you talk about complacency will very often creep in when you reach a certain level of success.
Mhm.
And how do we start combating that when that complacency starts settling in and we recognize it, like, oh, I'm getting comfortable, but I kind of like being comfortable. We as humans, we like to be comfortable, safe, protected, cozy blanket, all that stuff.
Sure.
How do we keep pushing through that complacency to get where we said we want to get to?
Yeah, so many great things to unpack here. And the first thing I like to say is, throughout my 20 years of being a leader of some type, something has never happened to me during that 20-year period. And that is, I have never had a leader at any level say to me, I don't want to get better. Right? And so I'm a firm believer that every leader, everybody listening to this message right now, has the desire to, at least some small degree, to improve and become more effective and make a bigger impact as a leader. But we have to also understand what is required. There is rent that's due in that process. And it's based on the foundational truth that growth and comfort do not coexist. We as leaders get to wake up every single day and make a choice. Growth doesn't happen by accident. It's not a random thing that just happens to us. It's a planned event made up of a series of intentional acts that's part of a deliberate process. So it starts with us. We get to choose every single morning, are we going to choose growth or are we going to choose to settle in for comfort? But that is an internal decision that we have to make. And so you may have all these growth beliefs and aspirations, but you've got to choose growth and the associated actions that come with that, and just not confuse that you can't have both at the same time. You can't be comfortable and grow, at least to the expectations that you have for yourself, at the same time. And so I think it really starts with a very intentional choice. And until we're able to delineate that we can't have both at the same time, you're probably going to be in a situation where it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back, another step forward, 2 steps back. Because as much as we want comfort, we just have to wrap our minds around the reality that we can't be comfortable if we're also aspiring to grow to higher and higher levels. Not a bad thing, just the unfortunate truth that we all have to deal with.
Right. It's reality. It happens to us when we're children. They call it growing pains
Right.
for a reason. It's not comfortable. You're awkward, feeling weird in your body that's changing size from while you're living in it. So yeah, growth is definitely not comfortable. And you mentioned if you're kind of wishy-washy about it and you haven't made that real delineation type of decision, you could have that 1 step forward, 2 steps back type of deal. But let's say that you are that high achieving, action oriented person, right? And even though you are that person, you're going for it, you can hit setbacks. And that makes you feel maybe that you're taking those 2 or 3 steps backwards, like, oh, I'm hitting this wall. Now I'm delayed and now I'm falling behind and all of this. How can we help these people understand that what they're experiencing is more of an opportunity than anything else,
Yeah.
and that they just need to lean in to that mindset even more of I'm going forward no matter what? How do we help them do that?
Yeah. I kind of goes back to childhood, right? I think we're almost naturally ingrained and wired that winning is good, losing is bad. We want the first place trophy. We want the high score at the end of the game, right? It's like we want to win. And anytime we don't win, there's just this negative connotation around it. And I think I want to challenge that belief head on, because failure is not the opposite of success. Failure is an absolutely key dependent element on the journey towards success. And so it's what we do with those failures. It's what we do with those setbacks. It's what we do with those missteps. And it's finding the learning opportunity there, because that's nothing more than a rep that we get to gain experience from. And after that rep, to at least some small degree, we're smarter, we're wiser, we're more knowledgeable, we have more experience. So the very next quote unquote rep, we can do it even better. And then we can do it even better. And then we can do it even better. So the thing that I want to caution leaders on, because once you do taste a certain level of success, we all become much more risk averse, right? We've reached this level. We don't want to go backwards. And so all of a sudden we almost by default opt for comfort because we don't want to do anything to knock us down from that pedestal, right? And so we almost develop a fear of failure. So it happens to us as kids, it happens to us along the way, and it still happens once we start reaching these higher levels of success. And so the big challenge that I like to issue people is, what if we reprogrammed our minds around what and how we are defining failure? What if, just let's just think about this. I want to challenge your audience to think about this. What if failure no longer meant not achieving, not acquiring, falling short, whatever we're currently defining failure as? What if we reprogrammed our minds into thinking we are now defining failure as not trying, as not taking that step, not launching that initiative, not taking that action? I think if failure meant not trying instead of not achieving, our lives would look wildly different. We would have much less fear around the failure, because now failure is just simply defined as not taking that step, not taking that risk, not taking, that action, because what sits on the other side of it, that's where all the learnings come from. There and only there are we going to find how to keep getting better. But it doesn't happen if we don't take the action. And it sure as hell don't happen if we don't take the action because we're afraid of failing.
That was worth the entire episode right there. What you just said was worth the entire episode. And I can't thank you enough for saying it, because it is a challenge to try to understand and wrap your mind around that kind of a concept. And I didn't even think that that's where you were going to go. I thought we were just going to go with, failure is feedback on what you were trying to do. That way you can modify and do better next time. Well, you went a step beyond where I was even thinking, which is just amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you so much for that.
You bet.
Are goals important? And if they are important, why do they fail in your experience?
Yeah. Yeah. I think goals absolutely are important. They set direction. They give us a North Star. But I think where we fail is through some derivatives of goal obsession. When we're just focused on the outcome, it's so easy to get knocked off course, right? If we're planning a trip to go climb Mount Everest and we're just looking at the top of the mountain peak of the world's tallest mountain, that first cold night, that first sickness or whatever kind of knocks us off course, we're still looking up at that peak mountain and we're saying, okay, that's too much. I can't do it. You get knocked out of the game. I think we have to reallocate our focus to the process far more than the end result. Because the goal or goal achievement, when we break it down to its simplest form, that's just the aggregated output from all of the small inputs that went into getting there. Somehow, some way, we forget about all that. We just keep looking at that blinking light at the top of the mountain that says, here's your goal. But that really doesn't happen without each and every single one of the steps up the mountain to get there. And so what I've seen through my experience is that on a personal level and a professional organizational level, just about every single goal, let's chalk it up to say 98% of goals fail for one of two reasons, if not for both. Number one is that you will always find goal failure attached to a lack of robust tracking and measuring systems. I think it was the High Performance Institute that ran this really interesting survey with 19,000 people. And what they found was pretty astonishing. They broke people up into cohorts to manage performance. And the cohort that set goals but had no tracking and measuring system in place performed no better than the cohort that didn't have a goal at all. And so it speaks to the importance that tracking, measuring, and monitoring as close to real time as possible as you can get, right? It's like we're coming up on the end of the year. Guess what we're about to do? We're about to set our New Year's resolutions. Weight loss always tends to be a big one. I want to lose 30 pounds by this time period. Great. What's your goal after week one? What you're going to find is a lot of people with like deer in the headlights, right? No, I just want to lose 30 in the next 6 months. Yeah, right. What is week one? What does week one look like? Because if you don't know that, I can almost assure you that you're not going to be on track by the first 2 weeks, right? So tracking and measuring, wildly important. The other one, more on a business and organizational level, shows up when short-term priorities become disconnected with long-term vision. What I mean by that is, yes, we have a North Star, we're setting the goal, but if we don't have our short-term priorities, our short-term focus clearly aligned with what needs to be true by when for us to be on track, we all get sucked up in the tornado or in the heat of battle where we're just reactionary. We're fighting fires, and we can wake up and a month will fly by and say, I've been working on a lot of things that in no way, shape, or form is going to help me make progress towards my goal. And so I think it's the focus to make sure what's the most important thing today, this week, this month is entirely and directly attached to generating the progress you need to make during that time period that keeps you on track for that longer term vision.
And I'm so glad you went there and broke that down, because it falls perfectly into something I can tag on for people, which is the shiny object syndrome. So
100%.
the way that I advise people to beat that if they come to me with that question is, just like you were saying, break down your long-term goal, your long-term vision into what is week 1, week 2, what does that look like?
Yep.
And then when the shiny objects start blinking at you saying, hey, look at me, I'm so cool, you can immediately think, okay, does this particular thing that I'm thinking about and distracted by right now, does this serve me right now for week 1 that I'm working on? Does it help me get there better, faster, more efficient? And if the answer is no, then you throw it away and you
100%.
move on.
Yeah, I like to have my clients go through a working backwards exercise, and we'll spend a considerable amount of time doing this because it's that important to then be able to generate that focus. Is I'll simply ask them, if we ran into each other 12 months from today, what does wild success look like? Let's get very clear on that. Let's not leave it up into the abstract, but let's create an elevator pitch so we know for your business, what does wild success look like 12 months from now? We're going to get as detailed as possible on that. Once we're clear on that, then we start working backwards. If that's what wild success looks like and what we're shooting for over the next 12 months, what must be true? What must be achieved in the next 6 months for us to be on track for that 12-month vision? We do the same thing. We tear it apart, we stretch it, we stress test it, we get very clear, then we work backwards again. Well, great. Now we can think in terms of quarters. So Q1 in 3 months, what must be true? What must be achieved in the next 3 months for us to be on track for that 6-month milestone? Challenge yourself to keep working backwards, because then you can get to the 1 month and down to the 1 week. And then everything, and here's where the discipline comes in, entrepreneurs. Once you get down to that more granular level to where you know what the most important thing is this week to keep you on track for the most important thing or things for this month, everything that falls outside of that priority scope becomes a no or not yet. That will ultimately be the measuring stick of how effectively you prioritize and how focused you are towards achieving your goal. And if you're saying yes to things that fall outside of that scope, it's just going to be a distraction that's disguised as easy opportunity or low-hanging fruit. And I assure you, it's not as low-hanging as you ever think that it is.
Oh man, that is so true. And again, I'm glad you said that, because the power of saying no to someone or not yet is, it's so freeing, and so many people struggle with it. And you just have to understand that the freedom on the other side of that is incredible. And we don't have enough time to unpack that subject and talk about people's mental framework around that. But you mentioned, we've talked about vision, quite a few times during this conversation, which has been fantastic, by the way. And I want to ask you, what is your personal vision for your life? What are you doing all this for?
Yeah. It kind of starts back to how we started the conversation around high performance, right? And I've seen too many times of high performance being conveniently defined across a couple of different ways or areas. And so for me, I hold myself to being a high performance human. What that looks like for me is looking at the most important jobs that I have on the planet, which is continuing to build my craft to be able to help leaders, entrepreneurs, and business owners take their businesses to the next level. But that can't come at the expense of my other jobs. Being a great husband to my wife, being a great father to my kids. And for those that say to me, well, you can't have it all, that's exactly what my purpose and my meaning is to call BS on that. Because if you're crushing it at work and you're a high earning professional, but you're on your fourth or fifth divorce, your kids don't know you, are you really a high performer or are you just a high earner for the time period? To me, to be a high performing human is to continuously improve and excel to meet my own expectations across those key areas of my life that are absolutely most important for me. That's a non negotiable. That's why I wake up every day. That's what I go to bed thinking about. And that is my filter at which I view the world on what I say yes or what I say no to.
That's really good. Really good. And we need more of that out here in the world for sure. So I'm super honored that you were able to come here and share this message with us today. And we started this conversation, building the foundation, who you are, where you came from, your mother, the x-ray tech, your father that started in the warehouse and working his way up. And so I want to kind of bookend it with some fun stuff, some
Yeah.
personal stuff here.
Sure.
Nothing to do with business. We're just going to have a little bit of fun. So
Yeah, let's do it.
yeah, Aaron, what is your favorite band?
Ooh, that is a good one. My favorite band. I would have to. Oh man, that's so tough. The one that keeps coming to mind right now for me is either Dave Matthews Band or Coldplay. Those are ones that's you give me a 6, 8, 10 song set list to. Those are two bands that jump top of mind where I could easily run through 6 to 10 of their songs without any problem.
Excellent. Yeah. I definitely enjoy Dave Matthews. I'm a drummer, so their drummer is
Oh,
just
nice.
super inspirational for me, and just how easy he makes that whole craft look. So
Yeah.
that's awesome. And how about a food that you will just flat out never eat?
Never eat. Ooh, that's another tough one. I'm typically good about being able to eat anything, but here's an interesting one. It's tomatoes. Um, I want to like tomatoes. I look at a tomato and it looks good. I even sometimes even crave tomatoes, but I can't do it. I don't know what it is, but it's like tomatoes. I just can't do it. I want to. I understand the appeal. I just can't.
Is it a texture thing?
I still haven't figured this out. I don't know. It's like no, I just can't. I'm working on it. If we talk again, I want to be able to come back and say I've cracked this whole tomato code here.
All right. All right. So it wasn't that you saw the Killer Tomatoes movies as a kid and that just like totally flipped the switch for you.
No, I just can't. Yeah, I just can't dial it in.
All right, fair enough, fair enough. And one last one here for you, sir. What is one bucket list item that you have not yet crossed off?
One bucket list item that I haven't crossed off. I think, my wife and I were talking about this, and I've got two small boys, 2 and 4. Um, yeah, I'm kind of big in traditions, right? I really want a bucket list item for me is kind of not so much of one thing that I can just check the box. It's more of kind of like an ongoing kind of event. And yeah, I think when me and my wife talk about like what success for us looks like, it's like looking at a holiday, whether it's Thanksgiving or Christmas, and without even having to ask, we've created such an environment where our two boys will want to bring their families, spend a week or a weekend with old mom and dad, with their kids. And for me, like, that's bucket list. That's me being able to sit back with my wife, who we've been together for, X number of years into the future, look at our two boys, their families. They want to come back, spend time with us during these like big moments. Like, for me, that's like, if we ask ourselves the question, like, what are we optimizing for? My days today are being optimized to be able to create that reality in the future. And so for me, that's that bucket list thing that I won't be able to check off for quite some time, but that's what I'm optimizing for today to create in the future.
It's a beautiful answer. Absolutely beautiful answer. Well, again, Aaron, this has been just a fantastic conversation. I'm so glad you were able to come on here. So many value nuggets and inspirational moments in here. So, guys, watch this episode again. Share it with those in your network. There are elements in here that can help not just entrepreneurs, but anyone that wants to level up their life and be more of a high performance person. So share this with your network, like the show. And again, Aaron, just thank you so much, man, for coming on. It's been a real pleasure.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, Brian. This was fun.
Absolutely. All right, guys. Peace. We'll see you in the next one.